Hi everyone, in this video of Accelerated Chess Dragon, we're going to be looking at another chess opening, and this is the Giuoco Piano. So without further ado, let's look at this opening. So white starts the game by playing e4, and now e5 by black. Knight f3, knight c6, and now d4. E takes d4, and now bishop c4. Now, the Giuoco Piano could happen in another move order, and that is that white will play bishop c4, black will play bishop c5, and then white will go for d3 and c3. But in this video, I'm going to be showing you how white will get to the Giuoco Piano variation by playing d4 first. So e takes d4, bishop c4, just developing, and now bishop c5, c3, all like in the Scotch Gambit. And instead of playing d takes c3 or d3, which happened in the Scotch Gambit, black is actually just going to develop his knight, and he's going to be okay with giving white a center. So c takes d4, and here bishop b4 check by black, checking the king, and this forces bishop d2. And here black has two ways to go about the position. He can either play knight takes e4, or he could go for bishop takes d2 check. Now, I'm going to be first looking at the move knight takes e4. Knight takes e4 will be played just to win a pawn directly from the opening. But white won't mind. He's just going to capture the bishop on b4. Black captures the bishop on b4. And now bishop takes f7 check. So this move really does exploit the vulnerability of both the b4 knight and the king. If you don't capture the bishop, then you've simply lost the right to castle, you've lost your f7 pawn, and let's just say that things won't end up well for black after that. So black will capture the bishop, queen b3 check, and you can see how the f7 square connects with the b4 square, and how the queen will attack the b4 knight from here. d5, queen takes b4, so just regaining the piece, rook e8, and here white will castle, and black will attack the queen. And after white plays queen b3, this position is said to be roughly equal. Black is going to castle artificially. Now, black could also go for bishop takes d2 check, which is the main line. And here white will just play knight b takes d2, all normal. And here, yet again, there is a branching. Black can either go for d5, or he could play knight takes e4. I'm going to be looking at knight takes e4 first, because it actually has a very nice variation tied with it. So white will play d5, attacking the knight, and black will capture the knight on d2. Queen takes d2 will be played, and now knight e7, d6. And the point of d6 is just to try cramping black's position, but also to give black an IQP. In this position, it doesn't matter whatever black will play, he will get an isolated queen pawn. Because he has to either capture this pawn on d6, to which white will play queen takes d6, or he could just play something like knight c6, to which white will play d takes c7, and the d pawn is isolated. So black will play c takes d6, white plays queen takes d6, and the pawn is isolated, and here castles by black, castles by white, and now white should be slightly better. He has blockaded the pawn from moving, and if he can get all of his pieces to attack the d7 pawn, then there is a chance that he is going to be able to win it back, and from there he should have a very good position. So after castles, that's where the variation ends. So d5 is the next variation. White will play e takes d5, black plays knight takes d5, both sides castle, rook c1, and now there are 4 moves, and this is perhaps the biggest branching in the entire variation. So the moves are knight b6, rook e8, bishop g4, and knight c e7. We're first going to be looking at knight c to e7. Knight c e7 is just retreating the knight to defend the d5 knight, and it's a very useful move because usually when you play against an isolated queen pawn position, you want to blockade the IQP. And the point of this is that if white captures the knight on d5, the knight on e7 will just replace it. And knights are said to be the best blockaders of pawns, so that would be a very favorable position for black. So white's just going to play rook e1, develop the rook, c6, knight e4, centralizing the knight, bishop g4, pinning the knight on f3, and here knight c5, threatening the b7 pawn. And black will now play queen c7. h3 by white, attacking the bishop, and here the bishop goes to h5. The bishop could capture the knight on f3, that is true, but in this variation, bishop h5. White plays g4, and now bishop g6. And after knight e5, despite the fact that white has actually pushed one of the pawns in front of his king, he has gained a good amount of space, and surely enough, this position can't be too bad. So that's where the variation ends for knight ce7. The next move we're going to be looking at is rook e8. And after rook e8, you play the same first move, rook e1. The rooks are going to get traded, and now bishop e6. Normal development move. And here white will play knight e4, developing his knight. Black will play knight f4, and now bishop takes e6. So bishop takes e6 is just getting rid of that bishop, and you may be thinking, why doesn't black play something like knight d3? Well, if black does this, then I encourage you to find how white would get a significant advantage from here. Okay, so white would be playing the move bishop takes f7 check. And the point of this move is that if black captures this bishop, hoping to get more material, since he thinks that inevitably you're going to be losing the exchange, then white will play knight eg5 check. And it's important that it's knight eg5 and not knight fg5. So after knight eg5 check, let's say king goes back to f8, then white will play queen e6. And you can just see how much better white is from a glance. Because first of all, he's threatening queen f7 mate. And he's also threatening the sneaky knight takes h7 checkmate as well. So black would have to play something like queen e7. And now white is actually winning material. And queen f5 check. And that d3 knight is gone. So after knight eg5 check, you could also just bring the king back. But that would just play into white's hand after queen e6 check. If you go king f8, then knight h7 is still checkmate. King h8, knight f7 check, king g8, and yep, this is checkmate. So that is not an option. Hence, after bishop takes e6, black must not play knight e3. And he should actually just capture the bishop at knight takes e6. We have rook d1, defending the d4 pawn, and here knight e7. And here white will play knight c5, and of course he's threatening to capture the b7 pawn, and he's also threatening to capture the e6 knight. So black will take the knight on c5, white will take the knight on c5, and now this position is about roughly equal. Black could play something like knight d5, followed by c6, or he could just move his queen to somewhere like e8. This position barely has anyone with an advantage, so most of the games from here should be drawn, and it's pretty understandable why. The next move after rook to e8 is bishop g4. Bishop g4 is just prematurely pinning the f3 knight. h3, white kicks the bishop away, bishop h5, and now bishop takes d5, eliminating that d5 knight, and after queen takes d5, white plays queen a4. So bishop f3, knight takes f3, and now rook a d8, developing the rook. Rook c5, and now queen d6. And here white just doubles on the c file, And here, knight takes d4, knight takes d4. You could also just play queen takes d4, both of the positions just transpose. So knight takes d4, queen takes d4. You trade the queens and knights off the board. And here, you don't capture the c7 pawn immediately. It is playable, but there's a very nicer move, and that is rook b5. Not aiming at the c pawn, but aiming at the b pawn. And why do we aim at the b pawn? Well, because the b pawn is basically the connection between the a and the c pawns. And if you can disrupt that connection, then those pawns will be isolated, and hence they'll be easier targets. So, with rook b5, it's hard to actually say how you're going to be defending this. You could play b6, that is true. You'd essentially have to give up material with rook takes c7, and this is just too bad for black. I mean, you've lost the c7 pawn, because white has a higher chance of getting rid of this a7 pawn than black does of getting rid of white's connected pawns. So, after rook takes c7, you would practically have to go defensive with either rook a8 or rook a4. And after rook a4, white will play a3, and after something like g6, white can go rook here, and the rook coming into d7 is a severe problem for black, hence why this position is a very nice one for white after rook to b5. So that's the end of bishop g4, but there's one move we have yet to cover, and that is knight b6. And after knight b6, white is just going to play bishop b3, saving his bishop. And here, bishop g4. And you could capture the pawn on d4 immediately, but that would just allow, after knight takes d4, queen takes d4, rook takes c7, a better position for white. So, hence, after bishop b3, black plays bishop g4, white plays h3, attacking the bishop. The bishop goes back to h5. After rook c5, bishop g6, this is the end of the variation. And after this variation, white is said to be slightly better. And why would we think that way? Well, first of all, this knight can jump into e5 very freely. And second of all, even though white does have an isolated queen pawn, it is quite easy to get rid of it. So white can get rid of his big weakness, and then it's essentially a good position for him from then on. So that is the end of the Giuoco Piano variation. So I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please let me know in the comment section, and stay tuned for more chess.